Thank you all so much for coming out for the BERC Innovation Expo. And I wanted to kick off tonight by thanking and recognizing all of the scientists and researchers who came here and presented their incredible science to you tonight and the breakthroughs that they're making. So a round of applause for them. We will be awarding $8,000 in prizes to these folks at the end of this talk. We'll be announcing the winners, so stay tuned for that. My name is Rachel Barge, and I'm a planner of this Innovation Expo. And it's a true honor for me tonight to introduce to you Jigar Shah, who is one of the most compelling and outstanding leaders in the energy space. Jigar is currently the CEO of the Carbon War Room, an organization that is removing barriers to deploy incredible energy technology and the deployment of technologies that will save carbon across many sectors of the global economy. And hopefully he'll touch on some of that amazing work tonight. In 2003, Jigar founded SunEdison, a company that completely disrupted the solar industry and allowed it to grow into a multi-billion-dollar industry through the PPA financing model. So that's an incredible achievement that really stands out in terms of Jigar's background. And I think we got to spend some time with Jigar earlier this afternoon with some of the other BERC leaders. And it's wonderful to have someone here who represents the ethic of really recognizing and bringing to the table and seeing the value of stakeholders across so many different disciplines. Jigar sits on the board of Greenpeace, and so he understands the value of activism and of sparking national conversations. He invented a financial model that helped deploy an amazing technology, so he understands the power of business. He's here tonight because he understands the value of research. And that kind of ethic is really what BERC is all about, bringing people from policy, from law, from business, from science, all together and kind of figuring out how we can help tackle the energy challenge. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce to you Jigar Shah. He'll be speaking for 20 minutes, and then we'll take Q&A, so get those questions ready. Jigar Shah.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure I deserve all of those remarks, but thank you so much for being so generous. I have to say that, walking around the floor downstairs, I was just in awe at how fast things continue to progress and how diverse the fields are that we're actually studying. It wasn't just nanotechnology. It wasn't just new forms of solar. It wasn't just new materials, but it was also two folks had cook stove posters around not really a new technology necessarily, but a new way to study how the deployment of cook stoves may actually work. And so part of my talk today is going to be, I actually was encouraged by the students to throw out my talk earlier today, so it'll be fresh here for you guys. But I think, an easy, maybe a good title of it is the role of capitalism in innovation. I think that for many of you, you've been watching the headlines with great interest, whether it be on Solyndra or loan guarantee programs. What's the proper role of government in these areas, and then ultimately, what's the proper role of research, and what's the proper role of research institutions like this one? First, I think, let me start with the capitalism side and then move to the other side. I do think that there is this notion that innovation in itself is an end, right? I mean, for many of you who either work with venture capitalists or with other innovators, I think that you see all this innovation and what you think is when you go home at night, you think, wow, over time, this innovation will actually be deployed. Right. I mean, most of you probably, think, well, gosh, if there's 400 folks doing innovative stuff in this area, one of them is actually going to break through. And I think that the challenge really is that our success rate since the 1970s has actually been quite poor. For those of you who've been studying this for a very long time, we decided as a nation and as a world to invest, in today's dollars. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars to try to figure out globally how we solve the oil crisis. For those of you who actually believe that we've figured out how to solve the oil crisis, please raise your hand. We have, though, made a lot of strides on building efficiency technologies. We've made a lot of strides on alternatives to coal. We've made a lot of strides in other areas. But the one area that we actually thought we were solving we actually haven't solved. And for those of you who are working on alternative fuels, or working on electric vehicles, or working in other areas, that's fantastic work. But ultimately, I don't think any of us in this room believe that the folks who are drilling for oil today are actually slowing down one bit because they feel the pressure of innovation eating into their market share, right? And so at some point, we have to have the conversation around what's the proper role of government, what's the proper role of capitalism, what's the proper role of these other areas in how we move things forward. And what I would suggest to you is that capitalism is actually this sort of loaded word, right? I mean, for those folks who live here, capitalism is venture capital, right? That is capitalism, right? I mean, the late Steve Jobs is capitalism. Andy Grove at Intel is capitalism, right? What we don't really recognize that, in fact, GM is capitalism, right? Calcified organizations who do tremendous amount of innovation, but not in the areas that seem to that matter the most to us is capitalism, right? And so part of what we have to try to figure out is where are the disconnects in terms of commercialization and deployment, and whose job is it to try to figure out how to solve those issues, right? Is it Berkeley's job? Is it the government's job, et cetera? So I'd love to take you through just a small amount of, just maybe an example to try to figure out how we go through these. Let's talk a little bit about the auto industry, because I think most people view that as yin and yang with the oil industry. I think that for many of you, you may actually have read in the history books that the auto industry was thriving with innovation, right? There were over 100 auto companies in the turn of the century, and they were burning all sorts of things, from cow manure to electric vehicles to multiple different types of fuel, not just gasoline. That in fact, they believed that it was a huge breakthrough that the entire industry coalesced around one fuel so that the government could play this big role of actually rolling out one fuel across the world, right? And more importantly than that, they actually agreed very early on, the auto industry did, to tax that fuel so they could actually generate revenue, which we all determine is the highway Christmas bill, that actually then is used to roll out all these roads and public infrastructure and all these things, right? So now we're faced with the fact that we actually have had technology since the 70s that we know work to substantially increase the fuel economy of cars, right? Today we've got big CAFE standards and lots of other things. And where is that, right? Fiber forge, right? Making cars out of carbon fiber. Figuring out how to take waste heat from exhaust and putting it back into the engine, right? Figuring out all of these different components, right? And then there's other folks who are going way out on a limb, right? There are folks who are trying to figure out single occupant vehicles, right? I mean, many of you guys have seen these because it's such a waste for us to drive a minivan by ourselves. And so you're thinking about that. The Google guys have made a lot of headlines along with DARPA around self-propelled vehicles, which a lot of the insurance industry folks are saying are actually better than trusting me and you to drive a car. They'd rather have a computer driving the car, right? And you and I probably would love to have a computer driving our car. I mean, we wouldn't get tickets for talking on our cell phone if our vehicles were driving themselves, right? And we could actually use that time. We could reclaim it. I mean, for those of you who live in the Bay Area, and then, unfortunately, I'm from Washington, D.C., where the traffic was deemed the worst in the entire country. But for those of you who are in that area, you might actually be spending an hour each way to get to work, right? So would you love to reclaim that time? Of course you would. And how much would you pay for that? You'd probably pay an additional $20,000 for a car that did that because your time is so infinitely valuable that you would actually do that in a heartbeat. And maybe even your companies would pay the extra $20,000 because they want an extra 2 hours of work from you, right? I mean, just like they give you free food so that you'll go to work faster. So you have all this innovation. So what's missing, right? I mean, we technically own General Motors. We technically have, bailed out Chrysler. We've done all these things. So why is it that this doesn't work? And I think the answer comes from the diversity that Berkeley has to offer, right? So for most of us, we would think that the answer comes from the mechanical engineering department, right? That does material science, that does advanced engine design. Most of us would say, well, the answer comes from, maybe, some of the other technical disciplines, some of the PhD students that work in some of these areas. And what you found was that, in fact, it doesn't necessarily come from that. That's not to suggest it doesn't come there, but you need the diversity of people to actually get involved in this area. So, for example, how many people think that the auto industry invented Zipcar? How many people think that they invented Hertz rental car? Right? How many people think they even invented fleet sales? Right? In all of these cases, they were invented by entrepreneurs who then were purchased by the auto industry to make them into captive sales channels for themselves at the time in which they needed to. So if we're looking for innovation in transportation, you're probably not going to get it out of General Motors. Not because they're a bad company, but because, they feel all sorts of things, right? I mean, if they feel like they add $500 to the cost of a car, their customers don't buy a car based on the levelized cost of ownership. They buy a car based on upfront costs. So they think that $500 is probably going to, come back to bite them, right? And so they say, no, well, we can't do it unless you do it for everybody. So that's CAFE standards. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So, if you're somebody who actually didn't invent PayPal or wasn't somebody who made a lot of money during PayPal, and you've got an engine design, what are you to do, right? You've decided that you're going to actually go to GM, Chrysler, Ford, Toyota. You're going to say, please use my engine. But guess what? GM does not actually buy engines from outside of their company. They make all their engines. Why? Because every single person who works at these auto companies actually thinks that they're engine people, right? Honda is an engine company. Toyota is an engine company, right? So why would they actually buy it from you, right? And so, no, they won't. So now you say, well, gosh, we actually need to figure out another way to get this to market. How do you do that, right? So now you go to Local Motors, fantastic new company out of Phoenix, and there's a loophole. That's probably a wrong word to use, but there's a loophole in the system such that if you want to make your own car for your own personal use, it's exempted, right, from all of the myriad of regulations that you have to go through. You have to meet the safety standards, but you don't actually have to get it tested and crash tested and all the other stuff that you need to do. So what they do is they've got about, I think, 10,000 folks on their platform, and they help you design a car. You can create an eco car, you can create a muscle car, you can do whatever you want to do. You create the perfect car, right? You use your engine design, you do all these things, you create the perfect car, right? Everybody wants it. You go there, they buy all the parts, they help you assemble them. In 6 days, you've got a car, because you actually have to physically turn the wrenches yourself to use the loophole. But they actually help you do that. So it's a nice vacation in Arizona. So you've got this car, you go home, and you're like, gosh, this car is amazing. And everyone says, oh my God, where'd you get that car? I made it myself. Suddenly, oh my God, you're the love of everyone, right? You're on the front page of USA Today, you've got all these other things, everyone loves you, and you're getting, 1,452 miles a gallon, and everyone's like, I want that car, but you can't sell it to anybody, right? That's part of the loophole. You can use it for your own use, but you can't sell it. Now, you probably could get away with selling one or two because the feds probably won't catch you. But if you sell 500, you can imagine that they would actually catch you, right? And when you go to the venture capitalist, they're going to say, that's an amazing car, but we're not going to give you $1 billion. Right? And so, but if you actually did sell 500 cars a year for 2 years, maybe they would give you that much, right? Because they would say, oh my God, there is huge market demand. You sold it for $80,000 a piece. This is great, right? So the government's role. So what should the government's role be, right? So the government did a stimulus plan. What should they do? Should they actually give you $1 billion? Should they say, I love you? This is amazing. And there are companies like this, right? Like Bright Automotive, which Amory Lovin spun out and GM put $5 million into. They did not get a loan guarantee, right? Edison, too, which won the $10 million Progressive X Prize. Did they get any money out of the government? Absolutely not. And so they didn't get money either. So now we're like, damn, we had this great opportunity to actually solve oil for the first time ever, and we missed it, right? Is that what happened? I don't know. But we might say that we missed it, right? So what else could the government do, right? And what I would suggest is what the government could have done is actually said, we are going to go into EPA and the National Highway Transportation Safety Board, and we're going to create a 500 vehicle exemption, right? A 500 vehicle exemption. And so that way, you actually have the ability to take your dream car that you've created, that you've put on your Facebook page, and everyone's liked it, and all this other stuff, your Twitter accounts all aflutter, and And you can actually start selling those cars, right? Seeing if it works, figuring out how to get there. Because then maybe Ford and Toyota and those guys are going to say, wow, my brand really is in the crapper. Maybe I need to buy this car because this car company actually is like going to lift my brand and make it into something that looks aspirational. Or maybe they won't. And maybe you'll actually go to some rich guy and you know, a rich woman, and they'll say here's, you know, all the money that you need, and you're going to get that done. But you'll never know, because we don't have an infrastructure in this country that allows transportation innovators to actually test out their stuff if the big six don't let you, right? And so that's where we are. And so what I would say is part of the government's role, and I would say actually their primary role, would be to actually set the rules of the game and actually play the referee, but not to actually pick the players in the field, which is what we've been through for the last 2 years, right? And so, and I would suggest to you, in an alternate example, which I'll make very quick, that the electricity industry actually is where they did do that, because the feds in general don't really have jurisdiction over electricity except for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so UL is a separate body from the feds. So if you have a new solar panel and you want to get it tested, who do you go to? You go to UL, give them $100,000, which generally is in the realm of possibility for many entrepreneurs, and they actually figure out whether it's safe to put on the grid. They won't tell you if it's cost effective or the payback is good or anything like that, but they'll actually tell you whether it's safe to interconnect with the grid. And then if it is safe, then California can have a program that allows for universal access, and you can test your wares, and if it works, then, you know, more and more and more people can get it, right? So I do think that there is a more level playing field. I would never call it a level playing field, but there's clearly more of a level playing field in electricity than there is in transportation. And I would suggest that, in fact, the world's innovators have tried to work on transportation, but the playing field wasn't level enough for them to actually try their wares, right? And so that, I think, is what we should be pushing for the federal government. So now the question becomes, where does Berkeley fit into this, right? How does Berkeley actually lead in this area? What I would say in transportation is it might be the case that you can never actually add money to the price of a car. If you look at something like the Prius, it hasn't really been a huge success, right? I mean, how many people think, I mean, there's 800 million vehicles in the world, 200 million or so in the US. How many of those vehicles are actually hybrids? 10 years later, right? 4 million, maybe? You know, and many of them are like these hybrid boost things, right? So I can actually even get much less gas mileage out of my vehicle and more power, right? So the ones that are actually giving you higher gas mileage is maybe only 2 million. So it really hasn't worked to say, well, you know, let's give people a tax credit and let's actually charge $3,000 more. What might work is actually doing a vehicle services model, right? Where you go to people and say, you take the car, and I'm going to just charge you, you know, 38 cents a mile for every mile you drive, because it's cheaper. You know, the fuel is cheaper, everything else is cheaper, et cetera. So if I put it all in the stack and I actually sell it to you on a life cycle cost of ownership basis, then it might actually be cheaper. And Larry Burns from GM, who was the head of R&D for GM, was explaining this to me and said basically that because of these self-driving vehicles and all these things, that in fact you could actually go to the point where he thinks that in Berkeley and Ann Arbor, that people basically, if you count the value of your time, pay $50 a day for being in a car, right? And that with that $50 a day, that includes your time, the gas, all the other things. And in fact, if you actually had self-driving vehicles, if you allowed people to work to check into a system where they actually just paid a monthly fee, if you actually, like, you know, used your iPhone app where you can hit a button and then the car would actually come to you at a pre-described time. If you did all these things, that you could go from $50 per vehicle today to literally 6 months from now with the existing technology, $3 or $2 per vehicle per day for people, right? That's a big deal. How much money is that in there for you? And like, if you guys decided to opt into this, how much would you pay? You might actually pay $10 or $12 or $14 a day for that service because it's cheaper than owning your own car. You don't have to have it sitting in a parking lot 97% of the time, which is by far, God knows, the worst economic investment that anyone could possibly make. And you'd make an 80, 90% gross margin on that particular piece, right? And so where does Berkeley fit into that? Well, maybe the Haas School could actually like figure out what the actual wastage is in this country. I mean, there's lots of people who say, here's how much time is wasted. There's a lot of those folks that do these kind of things. And then you actually look at, project finance models, and how do you actually ensure that the people are going to drive these many miles? Well, maybe you can use these car locating services to actually map how people drive and where they drive based on FICO score, based on other things, based on where they work, and all. So maybe you can actually choose areas that people can go. Maybe there's a human behavior component to this on, which consumers will actually go first. And for those of you who are interested in climate change, you may be following Tony Lieserowitz's work and at Yale, and some of the other folks at George Mason, who describe the 6 Americas, right? 12% of the Americas are alarmed about climate change, and then different percentages across. Maybe you co-segment the market. Maybe you do all of those things. But the question that I would suggest, and I said to the BERC folks earlier today, is I don't think that we actually, as a macro group, respect each other. Right? And I don't mean that individually. I respect you, I think that's great. But when I wake up in the morning, I don't think, oh my God, those Occupy Wall Street people are doing us a huge favor, right? I mean, how many people actually think that when you wake up in the morning, that they're doing a huge favor, right? How many of you have actually heard Paul Krugman talk on the radio or whatever and say, oh my God, Obama should be spending more on stimulus. What the hell is he talking about? Does he not know Keynesian economics and all these other things? At the same time, the Tea Party is doing this stuff, and you're like, yeah, that's right. We got educated. We got to do this stuff, right? Was it going anywhere? Hell no. The Tea Party's owned us, right? For the last year. So who actually solved that problem? Who actually has gotten us to the point where there might be an actual level playing field? 50 anarchists in New York. Right? 50 anarchists in New York do what they do, artistically, however you want to call it. And now there's a bunch of folks who don't have jobs, who are young people that are there. There's a bunch of people who don't have a job after 99 weeks on unemployment that are there. There's a bunch of union folks that are there. Now it's in 60 countries. It's in 60 cities. One of my friends just, participated in Occupy Omaha. So how many of you actually woke up one day and thought that was the person in Berkeley? Right? That was the person in Berkeley that was going to actually solve that problem, right? I don't know how many of you thought that, but my sense is it was a small number. And what I would suggest to you is that we talk a lot about cross-fertilization. We have, these cross teams. What is that professor in the Bev? Yep. Bev's back there. Hey, Bev. And so, great class, a lot of folks that are coming in that are multidisciplinary to try to solve these big problems. I would suggest to you that change comes from a lot of different areas. And after 40 years of a colossal failure in transportation, I would beg of you to think about some of these other areas and not think that technology will set us free, right? Because sometimes it does set us free, but oftentimes it doesn't set us free. And there are numbers of technologies from airplanes to transoceanic shipping to agriculture. It's mind-blowing to me how many technologies that many of you who are professors now invented 35 years ago or 30 years ago, that are still waiting for that technology to get to the finish line. And I would suggest that it's a lot of different people at the university that matters. One last thing, which it only happens in Berkeley, I think, but maybe it happens in other places, is I was taking the BART train to come over here, and who's sitting next to me, of course, John Gage on the BART. And I was like, hey, John, how you doing? And he's like, hey, I haven't seen you in 6 months. And he's like, what are you doing? Oh, I heard you're talking to the BERC thing. Well, you have to say something for me. And I said, okay, great, I will do that. So here it is. So he said, well, why don't we get 3,000 students in Berkeley to go out to all of the buildings in Berkeley and actually on one weekend do all of the energy audits, since Berkeley has a PACE program, et cetera, and actually just roll this thing out in a few months, right? Just roll the thing out, right? Everyone's looking for a job. God knows. Berkeley is one of the best schools in the country, but you don't have a 100% job placement rate from last year. So you put all these people together and you actually get them to do it, right? Let's stop studying it and figuring out whether it's better or worse if you do this sensor or that sensor. Let's just do it, I thought it was a great idea, but that usually doesn't come from the mechanical engineering department. It usually comes from a different department within Berkeley. And so what I would suggest to you is that we need everybody's help. And that starts with us saying, what the hell did we get ourselves into? We really need help. So with that, thank you very much. Should I ask for questions?
You may ask Jigar questions now. Yeah, and he'll go.
So I was really intrigued by your example with GM calculating the cost of car usage per day, and you gave a lot of examples of how it's hard for small companies to innovate. But here we're talking about a big company trying to innovate. So what are their hurdles in trying to provide us with the cheapest per day car?
So the question was really why, if this example was so filled with detail, what's GM's actual problem with implementing this idea, right? And GM's problem is the same problem that AT&T had, right? AT&T invented the cell phone. I mean, for those of you who are as old as I am, you remember the TV show Heart to Heart? Sorry, Motorola did, but AT&T had access to it. And those of you, like you saw the car phones and Heart to Heart and all these other television shows in the 70s, it wasn't like the technology didn't exist. And then Craig McCaw and other folks got money and they started their companies, et cetera. And then in 1996, we actually had the 1996 Telecom Act passed. And AT&T was like, this is great. We can sell content through all these other things. And then in 1999, they basically went bankrupt. So the challenge you have is for most of these companies, it is almost impossible to convince them to cannibalize their own sales. It is almost impossible, even if you have a CEO who loves the idea, Jim Rogers at Duke. I mean, the man has a heart of gold, extraordinary guy, gives great speeches. His company is nowhere when it comes to being green, right? I mean, you're talking about the guy that was on US CAP fighting for pollution. They're not top 10 in wind, solar, biomass, smart grid, energy efficiency, all sorts of things. But they are top 10 in burning coal. And they are the only company that's actually building 2 new coal plants in the country. So it's, what you find is most of these guys, if they actually did something as bold as this, their board would fire them in like a week. And then their shareholders wouldn't understand what the hell they were doing. So that's why you really need entrepreneurs to do it and then prove to these CEOs that there's actually a competitive threat cannibalizing their sales anyway. And then they say, well, gosh, if they're going to do it anyway, then we have to respond in kind and we have to actually be bold to maintain our market share. And unfortunately, that's how you mostly see these things happen.
Can you get more detail on that? How do you scare them into doing this? I think there are a lot of us who have ideas that we would like to scare.
Sure. Well, I can give you my case in point.
Yeah.
So SunEdison does solar as a service. And everyone says, but Jigar, why don't the utilities do this? Right, so let's just use PG&E as an example. We're in Berkeley, and PG&E basically, I think they did invest like $50 million or something into residential solar for, was it Sunrun maybe, which is great, right? But there's, over 100 megawatts a year going into PG&E's territory, tons of energy efficiency that they're mandated by the California Public Service Commission to actually implement, right? All sorts of things. Why the hell would you as a for-profit company allow other entrepreneurs to steal your customers? Why would you let them actually steal your lunch? I mean, think about it. Sierra Club is now partnered with Sungevity and Sunrun and all sorts of people, right, to to sell more residential solar in PG&E's territory. You have the FitRAM program that they've launched, et cetera. So what would you do? You're PG&E, right? You make money by being the collective. Right, you are the collective. Everyone has to plug into the collective. It's like the Borg. And if you're not actually if people leave the collective, let's say 5% of the customers leave the collective, what happens? The rest of the customers on the collective have to pay for the other costs, right? Is this a normal occurrence? We did have one earlier today at like 3 o'clock. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Go ahead.
That sounds like an almost perfect alignment of interest. I mean, if the case that you're making is that the collective has to pay more for energy if people get off of the collective, wouldn't it make it more of an incentive to get off of the collective faster?
Right, and so, sorry, to finish the story, so now SunEdison is a utility company, right? I mean, basically owns all these systems. It has 25-year payment mechanisms. It actually has this long-term relationship. So it can go back in and do deep retrofits for them and own those too. They can do fuel cells at the time that they want to. And the collective keeps getting more expensive because it's a run on the bank, right? As people leave the collective, the costs go up, which makes it more cost-effective for people to leave. And then costs go up again, which makes it more cost-effective for people to leave, right? So if you're a PG&E, you would think, oh my God, we should actually do something about this, right? When you talk to CEOs of utility companies, which I have a lot, they'll say their number one fear is distributed generation. Right? They hate distributed generation because they know it disintermediates them, right? So you would think that they would actually buy one of these companies. They would actually go to Sunrun and Sungevity and say, US Bank is charging 17% interest for all those residential solar systems. Why don't you just provide all the money to Sungevity and Sunrun at 12%? That's great for the utility, a 12% rate of return. They don't even have to do the work. They just buy all the stuff. Are they doing it? I don't know, but let's see. Maybe they're listening to this speech and maybe they'll actually do something about it. But it's not easy. I mean, the mobile phone industry actually has reacted to, Craig McCaw and other people actually stealing their lunch and stealing landlines. But the utility industry, I don't know. I think it's calcified. Most utility CEOs think that they're government employees almost, and they just sort of see their job as maintaining the status quo. But I guarantee you that I've said it publicly before, so it's not new here. That in 2 years' time, if PG&E doesn't solve this problem, they will be bankrupt in this state.
The last thing you said in your talk about going out there and doing it. I work with innovators in developing countries, and I used to work in commercialization here, in distributed energy generation. But one of the concerns that we always had, and the companies I work with have, is if they hire students or get interns, they know how to study something really, really tiny. They don't know how to go out and do it. What do you think is the role of the university in teaching students to go out and learn how to do things rather than studying?
Yeah, if you ask Peter Thiel, the people that would be best at actually doing those kind of things should never join university, right? That's his big thing with the thing. But I think that I would change a little bit in terms of, I think that there are a number of students that do things, right? The students who sign up to actually set up the BERC Symposium, the students who run city council or student council or whatever it is. I think there are a number of students, and there's a lot of those students who graduate with C's and because they've spent way too much time on extracurriculars and not enough time on their studies, and including myself, by the way. And so I think that, I do think that there are a number of students who actually learn through experiential learning and not really learn, that much through book learning, right? And so I do think that there's a way to do that, and there's Engineering Without Borders, and there's several of these organizations that do that. So I think this is great. The bigger problem I have actually is that I think that there needs to be diverse teams that try to solve big problems while they're actually doing the work, right? So for instance, today it's a 6-week payback to do solar in many of these villages, right? It's like if they pay $15 a month for solar, for lighting, for kerosene, for lighting, all these other things. It's a 6-week payback to do these things. How do we structurally actually solve these problems? And how do we use the data that we're getting in the field? One of the big solutions that just came out recently is integrating SIM cards with a lot of these, solar home systems and stuff, and actually letting people just pay $1 a week off their mobile phone. And if they don't have enough credit on their mobile phone, then the thing won't work, right? They have to go back and recharge it. And so it gives them an incentive because also their mobile phone won't work, right? Because they won't have any credits on there either. And so I do think that the experiential learning thing is a big deal, but I also think that figuring out why things don't work is a big deal. I'm so sick and tired of the fact that when I was in college, we were talking about recycling. Recycling is a joke. Seriously? There is so much embedded energy in all the stuff we throw away. And instead of actually recycling it, we should be putting it back into new products, right? Not actually, aluminum cans is one thing, we do that, but in plastic, we don't do that. We recycle it and we just sort of leave it there. Actually, most of it goes onto a boat and goes to China where they actually recycle it and put it into stuff. And so I do think that there are problems around us everywhere in the university. And it's amazing to me how many things 2 decades later after I go back to university, are still exactly the same as when I was there before. No one improved it. It's pretty sad.
General Motors and global capitalism. This summer, the CEO
How many people in this room think that alternative fuels and electric vehicles have been a raving success in Europe? There's your answer. A $1 gas tax, great, but ultimately, like, that price signal doesn't actually lead to people buying electric vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles. That's not the market failure. The market failure is something else. The market failure is that people actually buy on first cost, right? The market failure is that you need a new infrastructure so people don't get afraid when they buy an electric vehicle that they're going to be somewhere where they don't have a place to charge, right? There's other things. I think I'm a huge fan of putting a price on carbon, taxing gasoline, taxing stuff that we don't want more of, right? And the Europeans do drive, like, half or actually 2/3 less than we do, but they haven't switched off of oil. They're still addicted to oil.
So how do we develop a new infrastructure? Who's responsible? I mean, can we depend on government?
Well, I mean, the question is, how do we do it, and who's responsible for building the infrastructure? And I think, the answer depends on your point of view in the area of your expertise. So for me, I actually think that the meta-narrative of the last 35 years, which I think almost everybody is missing, is the miniaturization of infrastructure. I think it's far cheaper to build a controlled environment agriculture project on a roof of a store now at Walmart than it is to actually do factory farming. And I think the data shows that it's actually 20% cheaper to do it that way than doing factory farming. I think in the United States, forget about India, which this is really true in India, but in the United States, like, it's cheaper to give people distributed generation than to build the Sunrise Power Link in SDG&E's territory, right? And the data actually shows that, right? I mean, you actually, if you build a $1.3 or $1.4 billion transmission line, forget about the solar that it's supposed to actually bring in, but the actually building of the transmission line, after a 14.5% guaranteed rate of return, it ends up being about $6-7 billion you have to pay back over 40 years. And the data from San Diego Foundation showed there was like $940 million to do demand response, load control, ice storage, distributed generation to provide the same level of reliability in San Diego. It was just a lot less profit for SDG&E. So my sense is that there's a couple of ways to do that. The federal government can get involved. Electricity is a tough place for it to get involved. But the State Public Utilities Commission can get involved. The problem the State Public Utilities Commissions have, and California is better than most places, although in this case it wasn't, is that most State Public Utilities Commissioners are by far the most well-paid public servants in the state. And so it's a choice position that the governor gives to friends and family who don't know crap about electricity. And so now, like, your staff says, which SDG&E has said multiple times for this, the grid's going to go down if you don't approve this. And then who are you? If you're the governor of the state and you say, I got elected, how do you get elected? You don't get elected by being the world's expert in electricity, water, and sewer. You get elected by being great at community organizing and working with people and soft power and stuff like that. So you don't know anything about infrastructure. You know everything about police, firefighters, and teachers. And so now someone says the grid's going to go down if you do that. Then are you actually going to risk doing that, right? What if the grid goes down? You're not going to get reelected. And so this stuff doesn't happen. And that's why the Occupy Wall Street stuff is so important, right? And this goes back to the diversity, right? We all think that the power of our ideas, right? Victor Hugo, et cetera, the power of ideas are actually going to change the world. That is some complete bullshit, right? It is the power of our action that changes the world, right? It is power I helped write the California Solar Initiative in this state. And I got to tell you, I live in D.C. I got a lot of JetBlue miles doing that stuff. And it was my spreadsheet that wrote this whole thing. I set the 39 cent, 32 cent, whatever, feed-in tariff, the CSI things. I went in there and actually hired 3 full-time staff. SunEdison, when we only had, we were only 40 employees at the time. 6 of our employees were regulatory affairs, right? We had, I think, 75% of all the full-time regulatory staff in the country at the time at which we were doing that in 05 and 06. And, we made it happen. We worked hard. Our industry was the first industry to take down all the phone lines and fax lines for the Public Service Commission in California on solar, not on energy efficiency, not on solar thermal. When's the last time you saw a solar thermal billboard in this state? Those guys do not care about their industry. They're like, well, I've got a great technology and it's cheaper than solar PV. Why can't I actually do this? You got to go out there and hustle. I mean, I am so sick and tired of all these people telling me, but my stuff's cheaper than your stuff. I mean, how many people have heard like, I don't understand why solar PV is so successful and energy efficiency can't get anywhere, right? Why don't they mandate people do energy efficiency, when they do solar? Because they don't want it, right? I mean, they want it afterwards. After someone puts in solar, they're like, solar's only meeting 65% of my needs. How do I make it meet 100%? Oh, I should do energy efficiency. So that happens all the time. But I just think that there's this notion that like our ideas are so powerful that they're going to get that done. That is not true.
I'd like to combine that comment with a comment that we wrote. So it sounds that it might not be a technical solution, it might be a business model solution. It might just be a gumption and ingenuity solution. But we're also thinking about, okay, how can we energize students to just go out there and do it? How can you make students just go out there and do it and solve that hard, maybe business problem, not necessarily technology?
Oh, it's ridiculously easy. You just have to care. I mean, I'm on the board of Greenpeace. Greenpeace does this every week. They go to the students at the University of Miami, they give them 48 hours and they say, we need 500 volunteers to go on the beach to replicate a Vincent van Gogh painting on the beach. And they come. Like literally 48-hour notice, they come and then they do this beautiful aerial photograph of these folks who are saying like save the beach with like a Vincent van Gogh thing made from the shirts and the colors of the shirts that people are wearing. I mean, 48 hours notice. They do this. It's just that we don't believe that they do this because maybe you and I are not the folks, I mean, I am actually, but maybe you're not one of the folks who goes out when they call. But there are people who do go out when they call. I mean, how many thousands of people are in the Sierra Club and Greenpeace, like Student Network, and then there's the Students for Environmental Action Committee and a bunch of other.
Yeah, they got, when we met, it was 12,000 in DC. And we did
Yeah.
them in 2007. 15,000.
Yeah, 15,000 kids came to DC to get trained on how to do this stuff. Right? But when's the last time you had a great idea and you went to them and said, I think we can help each other. I can do this and you can do this and then we can together actually make change. Probably never. You should do it.
One more question and then we're going to have to go to the award ceremony.
Back there.
Yes, I just wanted to make a couple of comments.
Question.
Okay, questions, all right. What do you think about the fact that distributed generation is a form of insurance against catastrophe in society, whereby we don't have a single point of failure for major infrastructure like electricity, water, and stuff like that? Because if you imagine, say, a post-apocalypse scenario where you just
Fukushima.
and the power is out, whatever. I think if every community has the opportunity to actually generate their own power and water, they can survive.
So I'll give you an example. So it's a great question. Basically, like, what do you think about distributed generation as a hedge against, like national security issues, as well as just, price increases, as well as reliability issues? So SunEdison actually built. There was an old Air Force base in Sacramento, and SunEdison took a lot of the space, and we built what we call a ROC, right, Renewable Operations Center, and all of our systems actually are in the ROC, and there's this huge big screens, and we know exactly what's up and running, et cetera. There's a company in Denver, or in Boulder, called Spirae, S-P-I-R-A-E, that actually is probably one of the best companies I've seen that does utility scheduling software, so the utilities can actually use our distributed generation technologies to load level the grid. PG&E still today does not do that, by the way. They're mandated by CPUC to get all the data. They don't use it to actually load level their grid. And so you're in the situation where SunEdison actually provides 5-minute data to the Cal ISO in California about how well their solar systems are doing across the state. It's the only company that does that. They don't use that data. They don't schedule with that data. They don't use that data. I mean, all of these things are great. I mean, like, I could actually even say the long tail of climate change. If there's a 1% chance that all of that stuff is going to happen, why wouldn't you spend money to actually prevent that situation from occurring? I mean, Swiss Re, right? I don't know if you've seen their beautiful PowerPoint presentations of how many extra hurricanes are there because of this, et cetera. Swiss Re's, the vast majority of their investment portfolio is still in extractive industries. It's not in renewables. Their investment committee doesn't even talk to their risk mitigation committee. It's maddening, right? And so all I would suggest to you is that, I think that in what we're doing, there's a moral argument, which in yours, it's maybe more national security argument, but I would say there's a moral argument, which eventually we're going to have to win, right? There is a moral argument here. I mean, climate justice issues, social justice issues, people of lower means are the ones who die more of asthma. They live in places that have much higher pollution from all the things that we're doing as a society. There's a moral component to this. The component that I choose to work on now, just because I'm not actually very good at harnessing the moral component, is the greed component. And I use greed all day long. I mean, we should be doing this because it's literally the largest wealth creation opportunity on the planet that doesn't actually need a lot of stimulus funding, none actually, I think, from the government, because it's being paid for by energy waste. It's being paid for by inefficiency. And so that's the one I choose to use. The problem with national security is it also justifies the Keystone Pipeline, which I don't think is justifiable. Thank you.
Jigar gets a bottle of wine from BERC for his efforts. So thanks again to Jigar Shah.
So we have about 10 more minutes here. My name is Asher Bernsberg. I'm one of the co-presidents of BERC. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We are going to do an award ceremony. We're giving out $8,000 in prizes. We had just under 100 posters that were presented tonight. Terrific things. And I want to first thank our key sponsor for the Innovation Expo. Without them, this would absolutely not be possible. Moore Davidow made this event possible, and I want to introduce KT and Will to do that.
Thanks. So we couldn't be happier to be here tonight. We've for those of you who have seen the evolution of the Innovation Expo from almost 5 years ago, when it was posters jammed in the corners of MLK, to what it is tonight, I think it's fair to say we've come a long way. So I just want to have all the organizers stand up, because it's truly an impressive event that we've seen tonight, and I just want to give them a round of applause.
Great. So go Bears. We're both alumni, Will Coleman and I. KT Mortgott. Actually was a physics undergrad. I'm going to date myself a little bit by telling you a very, very short story about Art Rosenfeld, way back when, in the dinosaur ages, taught a physics class. And he told everybody, you guys, you got to stop at stop signs. You got to turn your engine off at stop signs. Not stop signs, at the stop lights. Turn your engine off. You're going to save some energy there. And today we have the Prius, and that was just 15, 20 years later. Berkeley is a critical element in energy research and energy policy. And I'm very proud to be from Cal. I hope that you are all proud to be here. And I think it's so critical that I really want to resonate on a lot of things that you were talking about. And really trying to build on that history and to be part of the future. So you want to talk about BERC?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's obvious is that Berkeley sits really at the hub, or could be sitting at the hub of the entire Bay Area energy ecosystem. I think that it has such an enormous amount of resources and research going on, and nights like tonight, I think, are really important to peel back the curtain a little bit and show everybody the type of research that's going on here and the amazing people who are here. So we're just glad to be supportive of that. And we as a firm, we're an early stage venture firm, so we like to engage extremely early in universities. And we as a firm want to continue to support that over time. We hope you all will continue to support it. We've engaged in a number of different ways on campus, one of which is, you might mention the Innovator Awards, actually, just briefly, just so people understand that. But we think it's incredibly important that this whole community come together frequently and understand the importance of going from research all the way through out to commercialization and getting products out into the marketplace and really changing the way we do business.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we really see that seeding that earliest stages of that is critical. And I was delighted to see several of the Moore Davidow innovators, faculty here at Berkeley and a couple at Stanford as well, who we have funded pre-tenure to go and try their crazy experiment. Go try that thing that the NSF, that the NIH, not the NIH, but the other government, federal funding or other regular, more typical funding, it just isn't going to give the funding for. And so I'm delighted to see folks from the labs of our innovators and the innovators themselves here, really trying to support the, as I said, the most innovative entrepreneurial faculty on campus.
So we won't belabor the point any longer. I think everyone wants their Bob Barker moment, so why don't you guys come on.
Thanks to KT and Will and to MDV for sponsoring this event. I'd also like to thank all of you for being here and also all of the researchers that shared their research with us today. My name is Sebastian Lunas. I'm the other co-president of BERC. And basically what we're going to do here is we're going to announce the third and second place winners. So we have 8 third and second place winners, and then we're going to actually bring up the first place winner, which is a $2,000 prize. So I'm going to start with the third place winners, which is $500 prizes. There's 4 of them, and please excuse any butchering of names that happens. So the first is Alan Yu. The second one is Aswath Rahman. The third is Chris Phillips. And the fourth is Craig Dana. So let's have a round of applause for all of our third prize winners. And Asher is going to introduce the second prize.
Yeah, mention the poster name.
Okay. There's some very creative line drawing between the numbers that won and the names of the technology, so bear with me here. For second place, we have Ashley Ward, non-precious metal catalyst for fuel cells. We have Jared Schweed. It's photon-enhanced thermonic emission for solar concentrator systems. We have Alex Luce, innovative materials engineering for next-generation solar cells. And we have Kenneth Armillo, which is Cal Sol Agua, bringing affordable solar water heating to the developing world. I'd like you guys. So I'd like to invite Will and KT to announce the first place winner. Is it written on there? Okay, it's on here.
And the first place winner, the first place winner is. Oh, before I do this, so I just want to say this is a great example of one that wouldn't have existed if it weren't for basic research and what comes out of basic research. It's not something a corporation would have done itself. And so this is, when you hear it, you'll understand why. And it's Jonathan Galeska. And he has done a new yeast for improved biofuels. And it came from a discovery of a new protein in yeast. So.
We have a photographer too, so if you guys could just start you guys can post this picture real quick. Okay. Yeah.
No, we should hold it. You should be behind it.
All right.
So folks, that is a wrap on this. We are here till 9. Basically, there's another 15 minutes to go up, have that last speak on that poster, and head out. Thank you so much for coming. Encourage you guys to all come to the symposium tomorrow. It is a sold-out event, so everybody here who has tickets, please keep your name badges. This will be the same ticket to get you in there tomorrow. We're going to be starting sharp at 8:40 in the seats at 8:40, so please show up in enough time to get there for registration before 8:30, 8 o'clock for breakfast. So thank you so much for coming. That's it.
Thank you very much.